Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at the new Victoria Beckham Eye Wardrobe eyeshadow palettes. And I already have a video with first impressions featuring the Victoria palette. So I'm going to leave that linked down below. There's a wear test in there and kind of my first impressions on that. Now, I do want to say that that's the palette I like the least out of these three performance-wise. So if you saw that and you were kind of turned off, take a look at this. You get a little bit more information here today. So let's first take a look at the packaging. Now I did cover how they come packaged in the first video, and the refills, you know, these are magnetic. So they're going to come just kind of in like the plastic eggshell kind of packaging, and then the case comes separately. So even if you purchase it all together, they do come separately. So this is our blue palette. So you can see there's a little notch here that will allow you to either stick your nail in or a little tool to lift that up because it is magnetic. So it doesn't have the holes back here, but you can definitely still replace these. So this is heavy duty, similar packaging to what she had before. It might be the same packaging. I'm not sure because I ended up not keeping mine. But one thing I do want to know is a few of these cases, they can be a little tough to open or close. You know, the spring might be a little bit tight on some of them. So just something to know. So this first palette here is called Navy Noir. And these palettes, if you look at her website, you'll see that there are eyeliner recommendations to match all of each of the palette matches at least a kajal. So if you have a particular favorite eye kajal, that might be a nice way to pick which one of these palettes you might be interested in. So you can see that we have three more powdery shadows here. And then in this case, our fourth one is going to be more of a cream product. And this cream product is more similar in texture to the lid luster formula. It's not exactly the same in my opinion, but that's kind of more what it's like. It's one of those more gritty cream kind of products that kind of melts into the skin. It looks a little flaky, but then it melts in and looks a little bit more seamless. So this is the Victoria palette. And the reason I didn't love this one as much is just because I do feel like a few of the shades, they kind of stick and can look a little bit patchy. You can see this time our second shade is going to be our cream here. And the other three shades are going to be the powder shades. I love the color story here. We have a rich camel, more of a deep brown. It's similar to the mink shade in the lid lusters. I do have those compared in the original video, but this is going to be a little bit more brown. Then we have a black, and we have more of a chestnut shade with a touch of red in there. So you can see that our Navy Noir palette is definitely cool tone with a denim blue, more of a navy blue, a bright electric blue, and a silver with a blue hue to it. Whereas Victoria is going to be a bit more warm with more of those warmer, cozy undertones. This one here is Night Flash, and I don't know, this or the green, one of those two, those are my favorite. So we start off with this really soft kind of minky brown shade. And then we have a black and a cream. And then our cream shade here is going to be a black shimmery cream. And I do want to note a difference here. The texture of the cream in this one is smoother. It's more finely milled and feels silkier than the previous two palettes that we've looked at so far. And the fourth palette here is Olive. This is what I'm wearing today. And we start off with another camel shade, but you can see this one has a little bit more red and it's a little bit deeper than the one in Victoria. And then we move into a more olive green. You can see this is powdery. I'm not sure if you caught that, but some of the powder that I had on my finger kind of just fell off. So then we have more of an emerald green. I think it's a really beautiful emerald green. I really like this color. And then we have more of a chartreuse cream shadow. And just like the Night Flash, this one is going to be a little bit more finely milled, a little bit creamier. And that definitely makes it different on the eyes. So let's take a look at these on the eyes, and we have a few demos. The Victoria Beckham Eye Wardrobe eyeshadow palettes retail for $75 US with a case, or just the refills alone are $50 US. They are refillable compacts, and as I mentioned, you have a little lever to lift up the palette. It is magnetic. So if you have a different palette, a magnetic palette that you'd like to put these in instead, they will work. Each palette has 7 grams of product. They're made in Italy and we have a 2-year shelf life. According to Victoria Beckham, it says Victoria's famous eye for color is at peak perfection in eye wardrobe. The ultimate shadow palette delivers exquisite performance in buttery smooth powder formulas and luxurious finishes. Hyper-perfected shade quartets. They are a collection of stunning and balanced color sets. Fashion-forward undertones, ingenious complements, and irresistible hero shades edited to inspire. Buttery and blendable formula. We have decadent, creamy textures infused with naturally derived ingredients and ultra-fine pigments. Buildable, silky, and easy to blend with no fallout. By the way, the palette is brass and it's heavy duty. These are long wear, cruelty-free, vegan, silicone-free, soy-free, gluten-free, dermatologist-tested, safe for sensitive skin, and non-comedogenic. The compacts themselves are made of brass, glass, aluminum, iron, stainless steel, and a glass mirror. Now, as we're looking at the different swatches on here, you can see that the powder formula, it definitely feels silky to the touch. I wouldn't really say buttery because to me, something that's buttery has a little bit more of a creamy texture to it. This feels more like a silky, thin pigment. And really that's how it applies. So when you put it on with a brush, you can see that you're going to really get more of a sheer layer of soft pigmentation, and you can layer that upon itself to deepen the impact. But if you really want full impact, I would recommend using a foam tip applicator or a fingertip, because that's going to give you a bit more pigmentation from the product without looking patchy. Now, my only issue is sometimes it's a little hard to get into certain areas with my fingertips, so I do prefer brushes, but I think that the finish actually looks better on the eye with a fingertip application, even for these powder products. Now, as for the cream shades, each of the quads does have a cream shadow, and these cream shadows, I think they're a little different. The one in the Victoria palette, that one is going to be the driest of the 4. Now, it feels very creamy to the touch. It melts into the eye, but we do have a bit more of those larger flaky pieces there. And that's what I mean when I say it's a little bit drier in texture, because those larger pieces, they do produce some fallout. So you do need to be careful whether you're applying with a brush or a fingertip, even just tapping it on lightly, you can still get some fallout with any of these shades. So as much as they like to use a lot of flowery, persuasive language in their marketing, I don't really agree with their descriptions of these shadows personally. So as I mentioned, the cream shadow in Victoria is probably the driest of that with the most fallout. Following that would be the one in the blue palette, the navy noir, but it's still going to be more creamy than the other one. I can't say that I've had any issues with it. The only thing I'd really like to know with that one is that one really makes a difference once you've put it on your skin and let it sit for a minute. It sort of melts into your skin a little bit. So when you tap it on, and you might see a little bit more of a flaky appearance to it. Maybe it doesn't look perfectly smooth. Go back and look at it 5 minutes later and it has sort of melted into your skin and you get a much more smooth and shimmery appearance to it. So that's something to note. That works with all of them, but I noticed the biggest difference with the Navy Noir palette. As for the creams in Night Flash and Olive, I would say those two both feel very similar texturally. They're going to be a little bit more finely milled in terms of the shimmer there, which makes it a little smoother and creamier. And I would have to say overall, these cream shadows, it's similar to what we see with the lid lusters. We have some with larger pieces and some that are more finely milled. So it's along the same idea. But I do have to say that the cream shade in the Victoria palette, for some reason, I've tried this one a few times now and I still get creasing, about midway into the day, no matter how careful I am or what primer I use. About 5 hours in, I start to see some creasing. Whereas with the other ones, I don't really have that issue. I could still get creasing with those, but it's not always a definite. It kind of depends on how I apply it. So even with the thinnest layers with Victoria cream shadow, that one I, for some reason, always get creasing. So my thoughts on these palettes, I have to say, I think these are definitely an improvement upon the previous formula. These feel a little bit smoother. They have a little bit more of a luxurious texture to them. The powders, they do have some kick up in the pan. They are a more, thin powder texture to them. They're very silky, easy to use. But again, the ones in the Victoria palette, I just feel like for some reason that camel shade there, I always get a little extra adhesion to one part of my eye, whether it's powdered or not powdered, it doesn't seem to matter how I prime it, but that camel shade seems to get a little patchy with blending. So that one, that's just another reason that the Victoria palette isn't my favorite. There just seem to be more issues with that one than the other three. However, I do think all of these palettes are an improvement. I like how all of the different shades actually have some delineation between them versus more of the ombre effect that we had in the previous version of her eyeshadow palettes. And I do think that these perform better. The other ones I was not a huge fan of. So in terms of the powder shadows, texturally, they do feel like a very thin shadow, more like a straight up pigment. If you're familiar with like the Hindosh palettes and so forth, I would say it's not quite as thin as those, but it's almost there. It's just a little bit, perhaps a little bit creamier than the straight up pressed pigments in the Hindosh palette. So if you're looking to get an idea of how they feel texturally, that would be my closest comparison. As for how they perform on the eyes, they go on okay. Sometimes there can be some issues blending it out and you just might need a little bit more work. One of the things I have noticed is sometimes when I go in with a light layer and then I try to layer on top, sometimes the adhesion isn't quite there, and you may notice that in one of the eye demos. So when that happens, that's when I know that I need to switch to a finger or a foam tip applicator, and then I don't really have any issues there. It's almost as though it just lacks a little bit of moisture in that area to truly grip onto the bottom layer. And so once I add something else, it kind of helps. Now, as for the color stories for the palettes, I really like these color stories. I think they are all gorgeous. I love the shades that were chosen for each. However, I do think that the palettes overall lack some lighter shades. It would be nice to have even their lightest shades in the palettes. Like, for example, the Victoria palette, the lightest shade in there is still going to be more of a medium tone shade. It would be nice to have a lighter shade in each palette, for me, that would definitely help. So I feel like these palettes overall are more for deeper smoky eyes, or perhaps using a shade, on its own. And a lot of the demos, well, not really the demos, but the photos for publicity that they have on their website, a lot of times the palette's being advertised as just using it for eyeliner. And I feel like that's kind of a missed marketing opportunity there, because you don't really get an idea of how the palette can be used as a whole if you're just using one shade in the marketing photo. But, I think that's because all of the shades in the quartets are going to be a little bit deeper and heavier. So, if you are going to utilize multiple shades in a palette, you're primarily, aside from the blue palette, you're going to be getting a deeper, smokier look. So these, for me, if I were to use these every day, I'd probably pair them with some lighter shades from some other lines, or I would utilize these more as single shadows, a single eyeshadow look. So those are my thoughts on that. I really like how the colors coordinate with the eye kajuls, but I do wish that they had some lighter shades in each of the quartets as well. So let's take a look at the swatches just one more time. And I have to say, I really love the color story of the Navy Noir palette. It's bright, it's unexpected. This electric blue, I think really makes the palette. That's the special shade there. I think it's a really beautiful palette. So if you like blue eyeshadows, I think that's actually a really, really beautiful color story here. I love the colors in Victoria, but again, this is my least favorite just because the performance isn't as, it's not as friendly and as long wearing as I would have preferred. Night Flash, however, wears like a dream. I love this one. I do feel like the color story is lacking a little originality. You know, we see palettes with similar color stories all the time, you know, so it would have been nice to have maybe perhaps something a little bit different. We've got like a black here and a black in the Victoria. So it would have been nice for them to differ a little bit more. And yes, this is more black. This has a little bit more brown in it, but they're so close. You can't really tell the difference on the eye. And then the olive palette here, I think, is stunning. I think this is a really great palette. The more rusty camel shade in here adds a slightly different hue to it. But again, with our green palettes, we almost always see a shade similar to that popped in there. It would have been nice to see something even a little different, more unique, to make that one stand out a little bit more from the competition. But overall, I think these are beautiful color stories, and I think the formulas are okay. They're definitely an improvement upon the originals, but they're just not going to be my personal favorite formulas. I favor things that feel a little bit richer and creamier texturally. And the powders, I feel like, are just a little bit thinner and more of a pressed pigment style than what is my personal preference. That being said, I think these are palettes that maybe I wouldn't use them every day, but I would wear them out for like a date night or a special occasion or something like that, because I think you can get some really beautiful deep looks with this. That would be great for like nighttime events. I love having more of the shimmery shades mixed in there with the creams, but I would definitely recommend putting on your eyeshadow prior to your foundation, just in case there's any fallout, because I did experience some fallout with not every shade, but most of the shades, regardless of application method. So one more time, I'm trying to get a little closer so you can see. And you can see how the thin powder pigments, you know, when you put those on, and again, I'm using a swiping motion here, you can see you get a little, it's not really patchiness, we're not having an adhesion issue, but it's not a smooth application either. So you can see with some of the shades, it's more evident than others. And that's one of the factors that really just kind of leads me into thinking these are just okay. So I wanted to compare some of these with the Cle de Peau. This is the 11 Azure Blue from Cle de Peau. And this is actually going to be more teal. I'm actually going to skip that primer shade there because you can't really see it. But you can see the shadows here. Our navies are going to be similar, but our blues are more turquoisey versus more of that like brighter electric blue and the softer denim blue. I don't really have one quite like Victoria, but this one here, number 4, Ocean Sunrise, was kind of my closest. So I wanted to go ahead and share that. I'm going to try and put the colors close to where they are for this. And you can see we do have, I didn't really swatch this one very well, but you can see that we do have a similar color story. We don't have as much red in the Cle de Peau as we do here in this chestnut shade. Our brown in the Cle de Peau is a little bit lighter, more of a bark shade, and our camel shades are actually very, very similar. So this, you know, I'd say it's a pretty close comparison. And then let's take a look at the green one, 10 Seagrass, and let's see how this compares. So this one here, this is kind of our light chartreusey olive shade. We have a bit more of a bark brown with a little bit of green in there. And then we have a deeper emerald, which is going to be a bit more blue than that in the Victoria Beckham palette. Now, if you have this palette from Bobbi Brown, this was holiday in 2023. So this is called the Jade Stone palette. If you have this, I'm not going to swatch all of these right now, but you can see that our shades here are going to be very, very close. This would actually be my closest comparison to the olive palette from Victoria Beckham. So you can kind of see we do have some similar hues there, and there are so many options. So if you have this one, you can pretty much replicate your looks. This is the Dior Denim. This is the older formula, but just another quick comparison. I'll put the shades over here so you can see. But again, this is going to be more of a teal with green color story. So again, our blue, our navy is similar. This is a little bit brighter, but the overall color story, nothing really has that electric blue. This is Dior Black Bow. I'm going to skip kind of the mauve shade here. We have more of a white instead of more of that cream shade. We have more blue, gray, silvers, and some blacks. So kind of a different, this one's actually a cooler color story, whereas the Victoria Beckham in Night Flash is more neutral. And then this is Jungle from Dior. Again, this is the older formula, but I wanted to compare this one because I think it is pretty close. We have, again, more of that orangey camel. The Dior is a little bit more orange. And then we have very similar shade. Oops, I didn't even swatch that one. We have very similar shades for the other colors. So again, it's going to be another similar color story. So I hope that was helpful. I would love to know your thoughts if you've tried these shadows and what you think of the new formula and the color stories. Overall, I think the color stories are great. They are classic color stories. They're not necessarily super unique, but I think they are beautiful color stories. They do skew a bit deep. So I would have loved to see some lighter, brighter shades mixed in there as well. And formula-wise, I think the formulas are okay. They're better than before, but they're just okay compared to what else is current on the market. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. I hope you have a wonderful day.